So, welcome to Blue Green SW14. This is our project that we're trying to put together for a toolkit for teachers. And so, we're just going to give you a bit of an insight into what our idea was. So, this is like an introductory video, if you like. So, I hadn't really been to Palewell Park for a number of years until I returned there and met you, Paddy, a few times. I suppose you've been going backwards and forwards there for the last few years. So what was your first impression, perhaps, when you got to Palewell Park? Did you see that it had potential, or did you need to have that kind of explained to you and perhaps appreciate what the opportunities were for teaching, for learning from that?
Yeah, so I've got a little bit more insight into it, given that some of my colleagues are working there more regularly and stuff. But actually, I had kind of largely overlooked that space as well. So visiting with you kind of gave me a little bit more focus into how we could utilize the space, what could be done here, and what kind of missed opportunities there were really, because it's right next door to Richmond Park, which is well renowned and a kind of a really busy learning space. And then further downstream, we've got Barnes Common that I kind of do a lot of learning activities on. So it was kind of felt like it was in the middle, it was in between. There were lots of missed opportunities, and hopefully through this project we could then draw some more attention to that. So yeah, I think I had ideas in that it could be used in a similar way to other spaces, or engaged with in a similar way to the other spaces. But it just wasn't really happening, I suppose, or it didn't feel like it was happening when we were walking around anyway.
Yeah, I think for me it's that idea of connection and opportunities and missed opportunities. Because I know I've taken my student teachers to the site of special scientific interest, the National Nature Reserve of Richmond Park, and I know I've taken the students to Barnes Common itself. I've been with you, I've been with Sharon over a number of years. So there's obviously many opportunities there, but it's this kind of missing piece in the jigsaw that we perhaps both felt that Palewell Common actually was. And when you go there, it feels like a much more local space. It doesn't feel like somewhere with traffic, with deer, with lots of signs telling you what you can and can't do. It does feel like a very, very different sort of community, municipal space. You see the kind of Richmond Park branding, you see there's a little cafe and a pavilion, you see people jogging, people doing yoga, lots and lots of dog walks. It does feel like a very well loved and well used space, but maybe not tapped into enough by local schools, because certainly from my perspective it's that human geographic perspective, how humans are interacting for good or ill with the space, that's quite an interesting thing to point out. And it's only when you spend an appreciable amount of time there can you actually start to see that kind of wider story, really.
Yeah, because it's really like conveniently situated near quite a few schools, walking distance of a number of schools. But I think if you're to be honest, and the teachers in those schools were to be honest, they probably wouldn't come to the top of their minds when they're looking for learning opportunities and outdoor opportunities. And the use of the space is largely probably reflective of that. Not a lot of people are using it to engage with nature and to engage with geographical concepts, like you mentioned.
So the rivers, the brook, Beverley Brook, is quite an interesting boundary, really, between Wandsworth and Richmond. And you and the team have been responsible for trying to bring that brook back into some sort of life, because I look at that and the students look at that and we see just a lot of silt and dirt, a river that really is concrete lined, a river that really just flows past quite quickly. So just explain some of the kind of things that you're trying to do to kind of re-engineer the river.
Well, I think first of all, it's important to be transparent and honest about the quality of the river at the moment, and it is not in a good state of health. The water quality is poor, but despite that, there's still wildlife that survives there and thrives in spite of all the pollutants that flow into the water there. So there's been European eel recorded there. It's a nursery for flounder who need freshwater rivers to mature. So it's an important space, and it is under pressure. There's a lot of pollution still flowing into there nowadays. So part of the work that's happening, but kind of curated by the conservation team at Barnes Common, is to renaturalize some of the river's channels. So introduce natural features to the channel, introduce sheltering spots for animals, increase the floral diversity, increase the stability of the banks, reduce the amount of sediment flowing through the river, and just have a better, healthier river, so we can try and provide more space for the animals that do live there currently. That's one of the key aspects, is that you're going to be able to try and create more space for what's living there, but there's the bigger issue of water quality here. So this is a starting point for a larger project which would address some of the water quality issues, which would then allow the diversity of the animals to flourish and for more animals to thrive in that space. It's a disconnected river. It's an engineered river. It's been interfered with for human purposes for centuries. So it's trying to actually reconnect that river with its natural journey. And by doing that, reconnecting it with the other species that rivers naturally support.
And we have to do this mindful of the fact that that land nearby has been changed immeasurably due to house building, due to the tarmac pavements, the roadways. There's a lot of things that impede that journey and mean that it's very, very straight. I mean, certainly in Palewell Park, it's very, very straight, unnaturally straight, and certainly the football pitches are perhaps traditionally the flood plain that it would have been allowed to flood, and now there's very little chance of that because there's no opportunity for that anymore.
Exactly, and it's very, very deep as well, as opposed, like, compared to the land beside it now. So it has been disconnected from the floodplain, and reconnecting that would be an amazing thing to do, but it seems a long way off. And this is just a kind of, again, like a starting point to what this river could be and what possibilities exist. So it's, again, looking at what opportunities and possibilities there are and what's being missed, and trying to work towards that larger vision. But definitely taking into account the kind of irreversible or immeasurable changes, like you mentioned, of the landscape all around this river. It may never be possible to reconnect it fully with the floodplain, and that might not be something we want to do, but its history needs to be considered in considering where it could go in the future.
And I was amazed the first time you told me about where the water comes from, because we imagine the rain falls from the sky and finds its way towards the river, and then the river finds its way towards the Thames and finds its way towards the sea. That's not really how Beverley Brook works, is it?
No, I think the diagram that we have in our textbooks and classrooms is probably a bit simplified. So much of this water is flowing in off the roads into ground drains, but also a large proportion of the water is coming from the Hogsmill sewage treatment plant. So this is treated water, treated sewage effluent. So yeah, it's been through a very human process to get to where it is. It's not the river it was in the past, and we can't restore it to what it was in the past, but we, by understanding what influences and impacts we're having on it nowadays, can try to strive towards something better than it is at the moment.
And there's obviously a lot of coordination that you need to do with other water management groups. We've worked with the South East Rivers Trust who've done works in Richmond Park, and there must be other groups of people who, in the background, kind of unseen by teachers, unrealised by children really, all these groups of people who really care deeply about the river, but you all need to work together as a big team really to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The river is a system, so nothing you do in the channel can be done in isolation to the rest of the river. The work that's done in Palewell should slow the flow and impact the risk of flooding further down in Barnes. So there's benefits to what happens up and down the river to other places up and down the river, and the South East Rivers Trust, of course, coordinate the catchment partnership, and having that catchment view, that whole systems view, is really important, because you can't operate in isolation to the other landowners, to the other stakeholders along the river stretch.
So if we go to the area of woodland that we've been working in, again, that's an area that's changed quite a lot over the last 6, 12 months, really, given the work that
Mm-hmm.
Barnes Common have done. We worked in a clearing. We worked in an area that was quite open to the sky, in an area where there's lots of wood chip, and we've created some stag beetle loggeries. Can you just explain how that landscape has come to be and the changes that you're making there?
Yeah, so again, the woodland has been influenced by people over many years. So there are a number of species there that aren't native to this area, and then some of the native species have without management or without interference with large herbivores and things that would naturally exist in an ecosystem like this, have just become imbalanced. So species like holly have been allowed to grow, and the woodland floor is very shaded, so you have less structural diversity. So right now you've got an upper canopy and lots of holly in the lower canopy. The issue is that some of these older trees, when they reach their end of life, won't have any saplings recruited to follow them on. So it means that your diversity is actually quite low. You get a less species richness. So the idea here is to remove some of the holly, allowing saplings to germinate, allowing them to find the light that they need to grow into this next stage of the woodland, and to also open up the woodland floor for other plants like small herbs and wildflowers that can increase the diversity of invertebrates, provide food sources for pollinators, butterflies, moths, things like that, and nest or egg laying sites for butterflies and things. So right now you've got low diversity, even though there's lots of trees and probably lots of stored carbon, and lots of other benefits that trees give us. But in terms of biodiversity, it's again something that can be better and would have been better in the past.
So in the national curriculum for science, for geography, for the early years, it's really important that children are learning outside their classroom. They're learning beyond the classroom. And we'd like to suggest that there's some ideas in this toolkit that could be used far more broadly. So if you've got a small patch of ground on your school site, if you've got a small copse of trees, some of the storytelling ideas, some of these science concepts, some of these ideas about human and physical impacts and changes and interactions could well be transferred to other sites. So we don't necessarily imagine that lots of people are going to be coming to Pelwell Park and perhaps using that, but it's a very, in many ways, ordinary municipal site. It's got a lot of kind of cut grass. It's very, very busy at the weekends. It's got huge impact there from football boots and children and families, and I'm sure litter and dog mess and all those kind of interactions that really impact it on it. And there may well be other sites that you've got near you, near your school, where you think, oh yeah, we've got a kind of site that's fringed by some woodland, fringed by some trees, and maybe I've never walked on that footpath into the woods. I've never walked to kind of just stand there and listen. I've never walked to kind of see what curation of that landscape there actually is. Is anybody lopping any of those trees down? Is anybody put any signage there about some oak processionary moth, or is there any story of what's happening there? Because there often is a kind of friends of or a group of local volunteers, or there'll be a document online that you can find from the local council about a plan. And certainly for this specific landscape, there was a Pelwell Park plan. It's quite a long document. It's not for children, but it's a really interesting document to kind of tell this 100-year-old story. It's a document that tells you about the worries that they've got for the site, the kind of plans for the site, the kind of community liaison for the site. So often when teachers do a bit of digging, when teachers look at a map, when teachers find these kind of PDFs online, it's quite surprising what you can find out about these sites if you just do a little bit of a bit of looking and a bit of digging. Is that a sort of thing that you think you would hope that teachers would take out of this as well?
Yeah, I think we situated the project in Pelwell Park because it's important to have a sense of place, to have roots to the ground. You know, these places don't exist in a vacuum. They're connected to all the places around them, and the schools that we hope to visit will have some kind of attitudes, opinions, perceptions perhaps of this space that kind of give another element to their interactions. And giving young people that sense of place and that kind of pride in their local area and having access to a space that they can go back and visit again is so important. So many times I have people and classes and groups visiting Barnes Common, and it's really joyful to hear people say, oh, I've been here before, or to just at the end of the day hear young people say, I'm going to come back, you know. So that access to green space is so important. So the kind of sense of place here is important, but like you say, this could just as well be anywhere else, and this is repeatable and reproducible anywhere across London. These green spaces exist hidden in amongst the urban mess that we live in, and our built environment. There are spaces, and sometimes very carefully planned, sometimes not so. So sometimes very carefully managed, sometimes not so. And being able to interact with a space like this and compare it to your school grounds, your nature reserve that you visit,
Kew
Gardens,
kind of internationally famous places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, you're seeing an experience like this as well as rather than an instead of, and using those kind of comparative skills and those critical thinking. Why is it like this? Should it be different? And then there's very good and probably many answers to these questions, but having those discussions will give students an understanding of why the place they live is the way it is.
We talk quite a lot with student teachers about a flow state, being in a flow state where you're really comfortable and settled and in a place where deeper critical thinking can occur. And I really would like to suggest that those student teachers that we work with today came ready to learn and to interact, and that was only because they had prior knowledge, not prior knowledge that was taught to them in a very didactic fashion where they'd had a lecture from us, but they'd been to the site before, they'd visited the site before, they'd had prior experience, and the prior experience that these trainees had was boots in the ground. I mean, it really was digging holes, it really was having an interaction, a really physical whole body, whole sensory interaction with mud and water and building something. And it doesn't necessarily suggest that children need to have that full sense of immersion, but actually having an impact on the landscape and then coming back to appreciate your hard work then gives you this time and space to be able to storyfy it, to be able to think more creatively and more imaginatively on it. And I would like to encourage perhaps teachers and schools to think, could we do a staff meeting? Could we have part of our inset day on the common? It may be weather dependent, maybe it's not weather dependent. I mean, maybe at the start of September. It's a really good thing to bring your whole staff, TAs as well, to a site and think about creative approaches to learning through lots of different subjects.
It was really clear that the students engaging with us in the project had that the repeated engagement was important, because I guess this is true for all of us as adults, and this as it is just as true for adults as it is for young people, in that we move around a lot. We work in one place, we live in another place. So seeing this as somewhere that you can visit repeatedly, and I think the young people that we were working with saw it in a different light. This isn't just a part of London they come to study now. It's they can go and explore, and there's other elements to it. And even for me, I'm so used to coming to Barnes Common because that's where I'm situated and that's where I work. And then seeing Pellwell as another place to go and explore gives you a different perspective and a different kind of, like, it opens your eyes to see what's possible. So yeah, we all kind of move around quite a lot and need encouragement maybe and guidance to see what's around the areas we work, what's around the areas we live, and to go back multiple times, because that's when you build a connection.
Yeah, I really do feel that it was a head and a hands and a heart experience. The fact that they did form a much deeper care and love and attention. Love's quite a strong word. I use that sometimes in teaching, and people look at you and think, what, love? Yeah, well, actually, because you care for it, you do think, well, I've now left that landscape in a different way. I've really interacted it by digging into the ground and moving that earth around. I do wonder what happens next, and actually that's for nature, that's for the stag beetles to find out. And I think we'll look forward to going back in the next 6 months, 12 months, and see hopefully that the rest of the people who use that space have cared for it. But we can't guarantee that, can we? And that's part of
Yeah,
the challenge, really,
of
these
course.
open spaces.
Yeah, and I think that connection to nature is it's become quite a salient concept in for young people, and there's this well kind of documented like dip in young people's connection and interest in nature, and a lot of it has been focused towards addressing that. But how as do we as adults kind of facilitate that connection to nature? And from my perspective, one of the most achievable ways is by first reconnecting ourselves with nature, and by modeling that, being role models. So if we can show a love for a place or a thing or something non-human, then we can model that to young people, and they can then start to see what it means to have a connection with a space local to them or local to their school or the tree in the playground in the school, So yeah, it's modeling.
So we're stood at the bridge and we're looking at the river. What should I be looking for when I'm looking at that straight-sided, concrete-channeled river?
Well, you've recognised the first element anyways, the straightness, the concrete channel, so those kind of human interventions, the engineering, the historical engineering, and then I suppose considering what the purpose of that was, and whether those purposes still fit our current needs, whether our past needs and our current needs and our future needs are the same. So part of the project that's ongoing in Beverly Brook is adapting to our changing needs, and in the future we're going to need better flood prevention, better flood mitigation and adaptation. We're going to need sources of water for ongoing droughts, so we're going to need to hold water in the landscape rather than let it all flow to sea. And we're going to need biodiversity because our biodiversity is under threat. So the project that's ongoing and is happening in the river channel is trying to renaturalize the river, give it back some of those natural features to adapt to those changing needs. So by having more natural meanders, we can clear some of the river bed, we can allow spawning of fish, invertebrates. Taking away some of the trees on the bankside allows more light into the banks. That gives you vegetation covering the banks, which reduces erosion into the river. And adapting to the changing needs because of our changing climate.
And you're taking down some of those trees from the bank and then putting them straight in the channel and affixing them to the riverbed. That was what was so surprising to me, to see that little stump of steel where you've actually fixed that trunk to the riverbed to really stop the flow or disrupt that flow to create those faster and slower flowing areas, which was really surprising to me. I hadn't seen that kind of specific, kind of very simple but effective intervention before.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, in a natural river, you can imagine the tree comes down, it may stay in place, it may move around, and that's the way it might work. In an urban river, there's considerations like floods, bridges, roads, and things like that. So part of this is considering the way the river is and the limitations, the setting put on the work you can do. So the water is moving quite fast, and it does move quite fast after heavy rainfall. So the potential that those things are moved and become obstacles further down the river it's a possibility. So to try and make sure that they stay in place, they're fixed in, so that we can make sure that they don't become a problem rather than a solution to a problem. Do the thing that we hope that we believe they're going to do, which is create diversity and flow, and create diversity of habitats and niches in the river.
And we've seen moorhens today, haven't we? We've seen wildlife that have clearly found a space in that calmer water.
Yeah, already you'll see different birds that'll use some of this vegetation for nesting sites, shelter. And there's part of the project was to do pre-surveys, so the biodiversity was surveyed, and later there'll be post-intervention surveys as well. So we're trying to make sure that we can measure the impact of this and actually scientifically document that this is a valuable process. So hopefully advocating for more work to be done elsewhere or practice to be shared with other river catchments and so on.
And it's a shame with this particular stretch of the river that there isn't more of a bank side, because there is pretty much a footpath, a fence, and then a precipitous drop. And it would be much better to have a much more naturalised, graduated gradient towards the river. But that's just been taken away over many decades, hasn't it?
That's right, yeah. If you go up and down the river, it changes somewhat. So in Richmond Park, it's a little bit different. Again, on Barnes Common, it's a bit different. You can get a bit closer. But yeah, in this instance, it's not really possible. And that's a shame, because you have a fence, you've got this physical separation, but you've also got that psychological separation as well, because people can't often see the river and kind of just walk by it. It just happens in parallel to our existence. Hopefully, by clearing some of the vegetation, as well as decreasing shade and increasing light, will also increase visibility and people's oversight and connection to the water and interest in the water.
Yeah, because generally the river is seen as a danger, a threat, and something to be hidden. And as you find elsewhere in both boroughs, sometimes it's buried underneath buildings. It's completely concrete channeled, and obviously that's the story of many rivers in London. So it's nice that this one's being slowly, steadily being brought back to life and to view for people to see and to appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just the start of a series of interventions along this river stretch. And by working with the other landowners, the other stakeholders, and along the river, hopefully we can increase the biodiversity of this whole stretch of river, and also the benefits to humans as well. The natural capital that's on our doorstep, the flood mitigation, the drought prevention that this waterway can provide us with as well. So it has many, many benefits.